In the year 1944, one of Hitler's most talented tank leaders made a critical error when he chose to reveal the truth to the Führer. Field Marshal Paul Kleist went against Hitler's directives during the collapse in Ukraine and was removed from his position within a matter of weeks. However, his harshest punishment awaited him later when he became one of the top-ranking Nazi officials to perish within Stalin's prison system. Paul Edward Kleist was born into a prestigious Prussian military lineage, with his family serving for many generations. His career began as a traditional cavalry officer during the First World War, commanding a squadron on the Eastern Front at Tannenberg. At the conclusion of the war, most military experts believed cavalry would continue to be the core of mobile warfare. Kleist held a different opinion. The invasion of Poland in 1939 offered Kleist his first real opportunity to test his innovative concepts. As the leader of the 22nd Motorized Corps, he adapted cavalry strategies to rapidly moving motorized units. His troops launched attacks on Polish defenses and withdrew quickly before the enemy could respond, creating confusion not only among the Polish soldiers, but also among German observers who were anticipating more traditional assaults. This accomplishment earned him greater responsibilities from the German High Command. Allied commanders considered the Ardennes forest to be an impassable obstacle for armored units. Its thick woods and narrow roads appeared to make rapid movement of large tank formations impossible. French military strategists relied heavily on the protection offered by the Ardennes and the Maginot Line against any potential attack from the east. Paul Kleist, however, did not share this view. Despite ongoing disputes with his officers, including Henry Gordon, he remained confident in his assessment. At the main point of assault known as the Hauptstützpunkt, he readied an unprecedented breakthrough. In the early months of 1940, the German High Command established Panzer Group Kleist. This marked the first occasion in history when several Panzer Corps were unified under a single command. Among them was Henry Gordon's 19th Panzer Corps, concentrating remarkable armored power under one operational leader. Never before had any army coordinated mechanized forces on such a scale. At Sedan, Kleist orchestrated the breakthrough with a level of precision that even astonished his own subordinates. Within 3 days, his Panzer Group pierced through French defenses, creating a gap spanning 50 miles in the Allied lines. The rapid advance dismantled French command organization and halted any structured counteroffensives. While maintaining strategic oversight, Kleist granted commanders like Gordon the liberty to exploit weaknesses and openings. The breakthrough completely outmaneuvered the Maginot Line and advanced tanks through terrain the Allied strategists had deemed impassable. On the 19th of July in 1940, Kleist received a promotion to Generaloberst and was honored with the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, acknowledging his pivotal contribution to France's rapid defeat. Adolf Hitler personally commended him and regarded him as one of Germany's most reliable field leaders. Kleist later mentioned that his methods had shortened the French campaign by many months. This operation broke French defenses and served as a blueprint for blitzkrieg tactics employed on the Eastern Front. However, his most significant challenge awaited him on the vast plains of Russia against an enemy unlike any he had encountered before. Operation Barbarossa commenced on the 22nd of June, 1941, with Paul Kleist commanding the 1st Panzer Group within Army Group South. His initial encounters with Soviet forces in Ukraine led to evaluations that conflicted with Nazi propaganda. In his reports to the High Command, he described Soviet soldiers as outstanding combatants with remarkable stamina, capable of functioning efficiently even when resources were scarce. This assessment directly challenged the regime's ideology that Slavs were naturally inferior and unable to maintain prolonged resistance. Kleist's troops achieved vast encirclements throughout Ukraine, breaching the Stalin Line, a series of Soviet border defenses, and capturing whole Soviet armies. At Brody, Uman, and Kiev, the 1st Panzer Group seized hundreds of thousands of prisoners, seemingly confirming German tactical dominance and Adolf Hitler's forecast that the Red Army would collapse in a matter of weeks. However, the truth was quite different. Despite facing significant disadvantages, Soviet units refused to capitulate and inflicted substantial losses on the German forces. Their commanders successfully organized defenses and adapted rapidly, learning from early setbacks and implementing counter strategies within a few weeks. Tank crews enhanced their coordination and began leveraging their vehicles' strengths against German armor. Paul Kellis's admiration for Soviet capabilities was evident in his equipment reports, where he praised the T-34 as the best tank worldwide, highlighting its outstanding armor and design. Soviet firepower surpassed German models in several ways. He was struck by the precision and range of Soviet artillery, while infantry weapons, such as the SVT-40 rifle, fired at a quicker pace than those standard to German forces. These facts directly contradicted Nazi beliefs about the industrial weaknesses of the Soviet Union. The true price of victory became obvious quickly. Within 3 months, German tank forces had been reduced by 50%. The Panzer divisions under Paul Kellis sustained heavy casualties despite their achievements, with reinforcements arriving slowly as Soviet opposition remained robust on multiple fronts. The level of conflict and losses far exceeded what German strategists had anticipated, pushing the Wehrmacht to its breaking point. Paul Edward Kellis attributed German achievements mainly to better training instead of racial superiority or advanced technology. His honest reports pointed out Soviet flexibility and their ability to maintain prolonged defense, which clashed with Hitler's unrealistic hopes. The growing divide between what was happening on the battlefield and Nazi ideology soon forced Paul Kellis to face decisions that went against the regime he served. In the oil-abundant Caucasus region, Paul Kellis made choices that preserved thousands of lives and created tensions with Nazi commanders. When he was appointed to lead Army Group A during Case Blue in the summer of 1942, he took over from Wilhelm List in November with the mission to capture Soviet oil installations in the mountainous area. The 1st Panzer Army advanced towards Grozny and Baku, securing strategic points such as Rostov-on-Don, Maykop, Krasnodar, and the Kuban territory. This was Germany's final major attempt to secure the resources necessary to continue the conflict. The Caucasus region presented 2 key challenges: difficult terrain and a mosaic of ethnic communities. While Nazi strategy demanded terror and exploitation, Paul Kellis opted for a different approach. Instead of imposing racial terror, he aimed to gain local support. He assigned 2 advisors, Ernst August Köstring and Oskar von Niedermeyer, both with past experience as military attachés in Moscow, whose deep understanding of regional cultures proved essential. This marked a clear departure from the Nazi practice of dispatching SS officials to enforce mass persecution policies. Paul Kellis's confrontations with Nazi figures such as Fritz Sauckel and Erich Koch concerning labor recruitment revealed his strong opposition to party doctrines. He insisted that labor enlistment in his area of operations be genuinely voluntary, which enraged both men who considered his stance a threat to their harsh forced labor initiatives. The notable intervention at Nalchik Ghetto highlighted Paul Kellis's readiness to openly dispute the regime's persecution efforts. When instructed to annihilate the Mountain Jews, Kellis instead demanded a review of their racial status by the Office of Racial Policy. Under his oversight, the Mountain Jews formed a council that successfully persuaded German officials that they were natives of the Caucasus region rather than part of the Jewish race. By refusing to obey orders to conduct widespread attacks against local Jewish populations and eliminating the Star of David in his jurisdiction, Paul Kellis saved thousands of lives, presenting a stark contradiction to the regime's racial violence. This compassionate stance directly opposed Nazi racial policy and drew sharp condemnation from party leaders and SS commanders, who branded it as betrayal. Kellis believed that collaboration was more effective than fear for achieving goals and maintaining control over areas. This practical mindset soon led to an even more intense conflict with Hitler's increasingly unrealistic demands. The breakdown of German defenses in Ukraine during March of 1944 put Paul Kellis in the most perilous position of his military career. The Soviet Dnieper-Carpathian offensive had smashed German lines, reclaiming almost all of the right bank Ukraine, while causing severe losses to Wehrmacht forces. The destruction of the salient, a protrusion in the front near Kryvyi Rih and Nikopol, resulted in Germany losing vital mining operations and nearly encircling the reorganized Sixth Army. With manpower and resources depleted, the military position became untenable. Hitler demanded impossible defensive stands, whereas Kelly saw that a strategic withdrawal was necessary to preserve his soldiers. Despite the inevitable collapse of defensive positions, the Führer commanded his forces to hold their ground. Kellis requested permission to retreat to stronger defensive lines, but Hitler denied his appeal. This disagreement between them intensified the already severe tension. Military pragmatism and political demands marked the height of escalating conflicts between Paul Kellis's battlefield judgments and Hitler's increasingly unrealistic ambitions. Paul Kellis's military career concluded when he openly challenged Hitler's command not to retreat during the collapse in Ukraine. He insisted on withdrawing Army Group A, directly opposing orders to hold their positions. The divide between actual combat conditions and Nazi dogma had become impossible to mend. Paul Kellis understood that retreat was the only viable option to preserve his forces. Hitler, however, saw maintaining territory as essential politically, regardless of the sacrifices required. On March 30th, 1944, Hitler relieved Paul Kellis of his command and replaced him with Ferdinand Schörner. This action demonstrated how far the regime had disconnected from the realities on the Eastern Front, prioritizing political considerations over military strategy. Paul Kellis's determination to protect his troops ultimately cost him his leadership, and within a few weeks, he went from a respected field marshal to an unwelcome figure. In late April 1945, American troops from the 26th Infantry Division captured Paul Kellis in Mitterfels and transferred him to British custody. That summer, he was summoned to give testimony at the Nuremberg trials. In September 1946, Paul Kellis was extradited to Yugoslavia, becoming the highest-ranking Wehrmacht officer to stand trial there. During the hearings, he stated that the 1941 bombing of Belgrade, known as Operation Retribution, was mainly politically motivated and carried out as an act of Hitler's personal vengeance. Paul Kellis was found guilty of war crimes and sentenced to serve 15 years in prison. The trial of Paul Kellis took place simultaneously with that of Colonel General Alexander Löhr. Löhr had led German forces in southeastern Europe and was responsible for the bombing of Belgrade. He was sentenced to death in the year 1947 and executed together with several lower-ranking Wehrmacht officers. Historians have later observed that although German troops committed horrific crimes in Yugoslavia, much of the prosecution against Kellis was driven by political reasons, and his individual culpability was never definitively established. In 1949, Kellis was extradited once more, this time to the Soviet Union. There, he was among only 3 German field marshals ever captured by Soviet troops, alongside Ferdinand Schörner and Friedrich Paulus. Soviet legal authorities accused Kellis of issuing unlawful orders. In Krasnodar alone, prosecutors claimed his forces were responsible for tens of thousands of civilian casualties and extensive damage to infrastructure, agricultural lands, and public services. Kellis was condemned to serve 25 years in a corrective labor camp. In 1952, this sentence was altered from a labor camp term to a prison term, and he was relocated to Vladimir Central Prison. The military collegium of the Soviet Supreme Court labeled him a particularly dangerous criminal and ordered him to be kept in strict isolation. Paul Kellis passed away from heart failure on November 13, 1954, within Vladimir Central Prison, making him one of the highest-ranking German officers to die in Soviet detention. In October 1955, following Chancellor Konrad Adenauer's trip to Moscow, the Soviets returned. His remains were brought back to Germany, along with other German soldiers found guilty of war crimes. From victories on the battlefield to a prison cell in Stalin's labor camp, Paul Kellis's life shows that even the most gifted commanders cannot escape the political forces they are part of. So the question arises, can exceptional military talent ever be fully separated from the politics it supports, or is it always intertwined with them? If you found this story interesting, check out our other videos about Germany's most notorious generals. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more untold tales from the war that shaped the world we know today.